Hey all, here OS Reviews. About this time last year, we revisited two first-generation foldables, the Motorola Razr from 2019 and the original Samsung Galaxy Z Flip. At the time, it was an interesting observation that foldable phones were finally becoming more affordable, as on the used marketplace, they could be found for around $200. And over the past year or so, that trend has really continued, as the base variant of the Motorola Razr from 2023 can actually be found for under $500 as a brand new foldable phone. But today we're taking a look at yet another slightly older model and see how it's holding up. This is going to be the Galaxy Z Flip3 revisited. And this is now a phone that you can find in refurbished condition on Amazon for around $200, if not less than that, which is extremely inexpensive, now putting it into the ultra budget territory. It looks almost identical to the yet newer Galaxy Z Flip 4, has a slightly larger 1.9-inch OLED display at the bottom here, which it's still not as large as on the newest Z Flip 5. Similar to the original Motorola Razr folding phone, is even more expansive, and you're able to consume media, watch videos, essentially use it as a mini phone on the cover display without even opening up the device. On here, it's still more restricted to accessing notifications, using it as a viewfinder for the camera to take higher quality selfies, as well as accessing basic features like music control, weather, pedometer function, alarm clock, timers, and a basic calendar. So a little bit more restrictive, but at the very least it is still larger than the original Z Flip that we saw previously. It has only a 1-inch display by contrast that is pill-shaped. That said, the footprint of both of these phones are quite similar, although on the Z Flip 3 you do have a slightly more wide array of color choices, and the overall materials are a little bit more matte compared to being super shiny and polished like on the original Z Flip, which is a bit more of a fingerprint magnet as a result. So instead of the super rounded corners, we now have slightly more boxy edges, which are slightly easier to grip and hold in your hand. Although on this particular generation, the Z Flip still has a slight gap if you're looking at it from the edge, but still fairly good build and construction, which is not too surprising considering that this was once a $1,000 phone that you can now find in a budget price range. Otherwise, located on the right-hand spine is going to be the power key along with the fingerprint scanner integrated in one, quite responsive, as well as the volume rocker. Very bottom here features the USB Type-C port for charging. At 15 watts, it's still relatively low. However, because the phone has a pretty small 3,300 milliamp hour capacity size, due to the folding nature having to make it quite slim, it still recharges the battery in around an hour and 20 minutes. Although this is pretty much a one-day phone, so you're not going to get super long endurance. We'll talk about that more later on in this video. You do have Qi wireless charging, however, on the back, which can recharge at 10 watts, but you have the convenience of not having to plug in any wires, and also supports reverse wireless charging as well. So if you pop something like wireless headphones on top of the battery case here, it can charge up the headphones using the phone's battery as a power bank if you're in an emergency. This phone does have stereo speakers as well. On the bottom, earpiece serves as a second unit, which is one improvement compared to the original Z Flip that did not have stereo speakers. Now, in terms of cameras, we have access to a primary 12-megapixel lens with optical image stabilization, assisted by another 12-megapixel ultra-wide-angle lens and a dual-tone LED flash. Camera performance, even on the latest generation Z Flip 5, is still not going to be able to beat the standard Galaxy S series flagship from that year, just because the sensor size is going to be a little bit smaller, just to make the phone a little bit more slim and pocketable. That being said, it's still perfectly serviceable. Just keep in mind it's not going to beat the latest Pixel or iPhone when it comes to the photography experience, and you'll be mostly content. Now, it's definitely pretty satisfying being able to flip the phone open and close, to reject a phone call, hang it up, for example, and just make it more compact if you're traveling or on the go, making it easier to slide into a pocket, and when you need it, have access to a much larger 6.7-inch Super AMOLED display, which has HDR10 support, and it's also fast at 120 Hz dynamic refresh rate. That's also an improvement compared to the original Galaxy Z Flip, which only had a standard 60 Hz refresh rate by comparison, and overall this is an excellent quality screen. Because of the OLED nature, colors really do pop, contrast is amazing, viewing angles are top of the line, and feels very smooth because of the fast refresh rate as well. However, due to that, when combined with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G processor, which isn't necessarily the most energy efficient chip, although very powerful, does mean that the 3,300 milliamp hour capacity battery again makes this pretty much a one-day phone, although it still mostly gets by. Now, of course, like the original generation Galaxy Z Flip and most folding phones in general, there will be a little bit of a crease if you're looking at it from a certain angle, although honestly, in day-to-day usage, it's not too distracting and something that mostly disappears if you're looking at it head-on. It's what Samsung markets as super thin glass. That being said, it's still more like a plexiglass rather than the super rigid Corning Gorilla Glass found on regular phones, of course, because at the end of the day, it has to bend with the laws of physics. However, it does feel a little bit more firm as compared to the original Motorola Razr phone, which was more plasticky. On Samsung's foldables, at least it has a little bit more rigidity to it, and it actually feels surprisingly close to regular glass as you're interacting with the phone. What hasn't changed though would be the overall aspect ratio, which like on most folding phones is going to be a little bit longer compared to most typical slab form factor devices. This one here stretching about 20:9. It's actually quite close to some Sony Xperia phones that kind of resembles a remote. And as a result, you get a pretty immersive, very cinematic experience as you are consuming media in a ultra widescreen aspect ratio. It also helps the phone become a little bit more manageable as you're holding onto it. It's not quite as wide. This is flanked by relatively symmetrical and slim looking bezels on all four edges of the device, along with a 10 megapixel selfie camera in the hole punch cutout. And overall, again, a pretty beautiful looking panel. The bezel, by the way, like on most foldables, are slightly higher than the actual display if you look at it from the side, which adds a little bit more of impact resistance. If you're putting it face down onto a table, it doesn't scratch the screen quite as easily. So otherwise, taking a closer look at the software experience, we are running on Samsung's One UI skin on top of Android, and the Z Flip 4 is slated to receive Android updates until 2025, since Samsung provides 4 years of OS upgrades, and this phone came out in 2021. And on top of that, OTA security upgrades and patches will continue to roll in until at least 2026. So it still has plenty of life left in it. Samsung is actually one of the market leaders at this moment when it comes to long-term software support. And some final specs here include 8 GB of built-in RAM, 128 gigs of built-in storage, and the phone is even rated to be IPX8. So if you accidentally dunk it into some water, a coffee spills over it, it should still survive, which is really incredible for a folding screen phone to reach this state compared to the original Z Flip and the Moto Razr 2019, which didn't have any IP rating of any sort. The hinge of the Z Flip 3 here actually is quite robust and can be positioned at virtually any angle like a mini laptop. It's quite flexible and you're able to set it upright like this as its own mini kickstand if you're watching back videos, using it as a tripod to take images with the front or rear facing cameras, so it doesn't just snap into one position. And as a flagship of yesteryear, it's not too surprising that other connectivity options are also fully stacked. Aside from 5G, dual-band Wi-Fi, GPS, Bluetooth, you also have NFC for contactless mobile payment, so no issues on those fronts at all. Now, the Snapdragon 888 here in 2023/24 is still extremely powerful, as we've seen in a couple of other phones that's rocking the same chip, that you really aren't missing anything when it comes to system fluidity, even doing gaming as well. The only thing to watch out for would be the 888 actually is not the most thermally efficient chip, surprisingly. So as compared to the Snapdragon 865, for example, it has a tendency on average to get a little bit warmer, and that is certainly the case on the Z Flip 3. It wasn't crippling. I didn't really encounter too many instances of thermal throttling. However, if you're doing a lot of demanding gaming, as well as installing software updates in the background, it definitely will get a little bit more toasty on the back there, actually kind of similar to on some Google Pixel phones with tensor chips. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But overall, still plenty of horsepower in here to handle pretty much anything that you want to throw at it. It never really misses a beat. Now, of course, Samsung's One UI can be a little bit polarizing. On one hand, it gives you plenty of customization options. Aside from the regular Google apps, you have Samsung's own suite of apps, including the Galaxy Store, and even their versions of browser, utility tools on top of regular standards like Google Chrome as well. So there is some degree of overlap or redundancy because there are two ways of doing a lot of these things, but at least it gives you a choice that you can pick between. Now, if we take a closer look at the camera performance next, you're able to easily jump back and forth between the wide angle as well as the primary lens. The menu interaction here feels very smooth and fast, not too much lag going on. You can capture portrait bokeh effects as well as capture video at 4K 30 FPS without any problems. Now, under more, you can also go into advanced pro mode for adjusting properties like ISO and white balance more manually, in addition to having access to a night mode, which will increase the exposure time on the lens. And there is even a mode where you can turn on the cover screen so the person on the other side can simultaneously see how they look like in the image as you are taking a snap. Use the hinge here to close it up. It will automatically detect that and start to change the UI elements around on the screen. Like a mini laptop or Nokia communicators of yesteryear, you can more easily toggle these settings, resting it onto a table. And similarly, if we revisit some of the snaps here, you have a virtual touchpad on the very bottom in this laptop mode, and just the image there at the top that you can also scroll through without having to touch the display here on the very top. Multi-touch also will work as well. So really is quite cute in terms of some of the software modes. Now granted, is this going to be 100% practical in every single scenario? Probably not, because you are actually covering up a portion of the screen using the virtual trackpad and resulting with a smaller preview up top, as you can tell there. But still, it's a neat software application that kind of takes advantage of the folding aspect of the phone. And revisiting some of the results of the regular 1x lens versus the ultra-wide angle, we can tell that the lens distortion on the side here is handled surprisingly well. It's not too dramatically curved off at the edges, so the software processing is doing a good enough job. And also auto HDR is still retaining plenty of detail and textures like the clouds as well as shadows, not crushing too many of those fine details. Granted, I will say that Samsung cameras, and especially on the Z Flip3 here, tends to be a little bit more on the oversaturated, super vibrant side of things rather than being the most realistic, but overall, it's definitely not a bad look. Gives a lot of energy to the photos as a result, such as this very dramatic sunset in the skies here, and ultimately certainly not bad at all. Now, other tricks similar to other past Samsung phones we've seen, including multitasking, splitting between two open applications, also work quite well. We'll take this opportunity to do a quick demo of the speaker quality next. Takeaway being that the stereo speakers are quite immersive and, again, add a lot of overall richness to the music or videos that you're consuming, especially with the wider aspect ratio than normal. It actually gives you a pretty good effect as you're holding it in this horizontal view, coupled with this beautiful display as well. It makes it a joy for things like YouTube, Netflix, watching movies, and TV clips in general. I will also point out that the speakers here are tuned by AKG and have a pretty good overall volume and richness to them as phone speakers. Doesn't distort too much at higher volume levels either. Although you are not getting a ton of bass here, it's still satisfactory for what it is. Pages open up almost instantly once you tap on them, as you can tell here. You don't have to be waiting too long at all. I was able to open up around 15 to 20 tabs in the browser, and things were still being able to be held into the system memory without too many complaints or problems, so no real issues here when it comes to general web browsing. One thing I will say though is the Type-C port does not have video output, unlike a lot of the other Galaxy S series phones, so there is no Samsung DeX mode on the Z Flip line at the moment, which is a little bit of a shame because the horsepower underneath here is more than capable enough. Samsung claims that it's because they have a slimmer package here, so due to the maybe power consumption constraints, it means that if you are connecting this to an external monitor or TV, you unfortunately won't get that pseudo Chromebook-like experience. If you connect a keyboard and mouse, you can't really use it as your mini computer like you can on many of the other flagship-grade Samsung phones. So maybe that's something that will change in future revisions, but it's the condition here at the moment with the Z Flip3. With that being said, you can use wireless screen sharing tools including Chromecast and Miracast just to reflect what your phone's display is seeing on a larger panel. It's just not going to convert it into a desktop mode. That said, it should come as no surprise that areas including haptics as well as even gaming, when it comes to pretty much installing any title from the Play Store, even heavier ones like Genshin, PUBG, Asphalt series can be done with ease, no problems here at all, playing it back at even pretty high frame rate settings without much stuttering going on, because the, again, 888 is still pretty much a beast when it comes to most titles that you're trying to play back. Not to mention less graphically demanding applications, whether it's going to be ebook, comic reading, social media apps, including Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Snapchat, will all work flawlessly on this phone, as it should for a flagship tier processor that we have here on board. So that is more or less it as far as our revisited look at the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip3 here in 2023, heading into 2024 really, and now positioning itself as a ultra budget foldable phone, and perhaps the best one yet if you really are curious about how this form factor functions, now that this phone is really indistinguishable in terms of pricing from the regular Galaxy S series variant from the same year, and that is the Galaxy S21 line can also be found at a similar around $200 price, in fact even for a little bit more typically. So it's interesting that the foldable phone, which was much more expensive when it comes to the materials as well as build, just requiring a little bit more R&D, can now be found at an even more steep discount. You're still getting a phone that has an excellent overall performance thanks to the 888 5G chip there from Qualcomm. all without really having to spend an arm or a leg. And the convenience of a smaller folding phone like this is really about the portability plus having a little bit more of a fashionable appearance. There are hundreds of cases, in fact, I've seen online where you can even further decorate this thing and make it more personalized, which I think is one of the reasons why the Galaxy Z Flip line has been rather popular. So all in all, I would say that this particular phone, again, the Z Flip 3, is still plenty usable, while being at a point in time where foldable phones, although no longer completely new to the market, are still at least novel enough for them to seem still a bit unique if you're using them out in the public, that it makes it a pretty good value here. A mix of performance as well as design and just being something a little bit more fun to play around with. Although it may not be a perfect phone when it comes to the battery capacity being just a little bit on the small side, especially again if you are considering a used unit, there might be some degree of battery degradation going on, though again as mostly a one-day phone, it should still be an okay enough experience. And also again, the camera quality here not being absolutely top of the line, however it is still more than good enough as compared to the newest mid-range models, which although not bad by any stretch, in fact even new budget phones as we've seen in earlier videos are doing quite well. You don't necessarily get the same fit and finish when it comes to the build quality as well as the GPU and CPU package. In many cases is still going to be not as strong as a flagship of yesteryear. So anyways, you can check out more details if interested in the links down below. Great to see again this type of tech get more accessible and cost effective in general. That has been the Galaxy Z Flip 3, now a very low cost foldable smartphone.